Imagine discovering that once a month, behind the scenes, top officials from around 60 central banks quietly gather in Switzerland. No press, no live stream, no social media updates. On the surface, it looks like another technical policy meeting. But inside those polished rooms in Basel, they're working through scenarios that could fundamentally alter how you pay for groceries, how your salary arrives, and how your savings hold value over the next decade. Most of us go through life with a simple assumption. Our dollars will work tomorrow just like they do today. We swipe a card, tap a phone, or hand over cash without ever wondering whether the cashier might say, "Sorry, we don't really want those anymore." That confidence rests on something we almost never think about: the dollar's role as the dominant global currency. For decades, the rest of the world has needed dollars for trade, finance, and reserves. That demand quietly supports our standard of living. But what happens if the rest of the world builds a system where they don't need our currency anymore? Inside those monthly meetings, that's not a hypothetical puzzle. It's a planning problem. The Bank for International Settlements, the central bank of central banks, has published agendas and project outlines that show a clear pattern: less focus on fine-tuning interest rates, more focus on crisis simulations and alternative payment architectures. The nightmare scenario they model is no longer some distant fantasy: a rapid structural decline in the dollar's role as the world's primary reserve and settlement currency. What should grab our attention is how these discussions are framed. Leading figures like Jerome Powell and Christine Lagarde are not spending their time debating whether the dollar-centric order might eventually erode. Instead, behind closed doors, the language has shifted to questions of timing, logistics, and transition management. Conference documents and research papers describe contingency plans for trade settlement systems that minimize or bypass dollar use. Technical working groups design ways to keep global finance functioning smoothly if, for any reason, access to traditional dollar channels becomes more limited, more politicized, or simply less efficient than newer alternatives. You won't hear about these planning sessions on evening news shows. Policymakers understand that broadcasting the full extent of this work too loudly could rattle markets and raise uncomfortable questions. But if we follow the evidence, what central banks are buying, building, and testing, it becomes obvious that the ground under the dollar's dominance is shifting. Take reserve management. Central banks hold large portfolios of foreign assets, including U.S. Treasury bonds. For years, those holdings grew steadily. Recently, the pattern changed. Surveys from the World Gold Council showed that a large majority of central banks expect to reduce their dollar exposure and increase assets like gold and other currencies. These are conservative institutions. They move slowly and hate uncertainty. So, when they start adjusting portfolios in the same direction, away from unilateral reliance on the dollar, it signals a long-term strategic recalibration, not a short-term trade. At the same time, the BIS has launched innovation hubs and pilot projects specifically aimed at building new cross-border payment and settlement systems. The language is technical: interoperability, wholesale digital currencies, multi-currency corridors. But the practical goal is clear: design a financial plumbing system where no single country's currency is indispensable. This shift isn't happening in a vacuum. It's layered over another massive transformation: the rise of central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs. While private cryptocurrencies grabbed headlines and online debates, central banks quietly explored how to create their own digital money, not to mimic Bitcoin, but to upgrade state-backed currency for the digital age. China leads the pack in this area. The digital Yuan, or ECNY, has moved from small trials to large-scale usage. Millions of Chinese citizens can pay for everyday items, receive wages, and interact with government services using a digital currency issued directly by the central bank. Transaction volumes have reached the equivalent of hundreds of billions of dollars, and pilot regions keep expanding. The system doesn't rely on traditional commercial banks in the same way our current model does. It runs on new rails that could, in principle, be linked directly with other countries' digital currencies, skipping over older dollar-based networks. Europe is following its own path. The European Central Bank has poured resources into exploring a digital euro, Public communications are cautious and measured, but behind the scenes, technical teams are testing how such a currency could support everything from retail payments to large value transfers across the euro area. From the perspective of an ordinary person, the appeal is simple: faster payments, lower fees, and a system that works seamlessly across borders. From the perspective of a central bank, the attraction is even deeper: more direct control over the payment infrastructure, reduced reliance on foreign currencies, and additional tools for crisis management. Add to that the BIS's M-Bridge project, which connects multiple central banks through a shared digital currency platform. It has already reached a stage where real transactions between participating countries can be processed in seconds. Instead of routing payments through multiple banks and intermediary currencies, money can move directly from one central bank to another. Now, layer in geopolitics. Countries targeted by sanctions or dependent on the dollar-dominated banking channels have powerful incentives to build alternatives. Russia and Iran, for instance, have turned to cryptocurrency and regional settlement mechanisms to conduct energy trade without going through the U.S.-controlled parts of the global financial system. The BRICS bloc, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, plus recent additions, has been explicitly exploring ways to reduce reliance on the dollar. One of their initiatives is a payment bridge that links national systems in a way that avoids SWIFT, the messaging network at the heart of most dollar-based international transfers. In practical terms, this means that a Brazilian company can pay a Chinese or Indian supplier in local currencies or through regional arrangements without converting into dollars first. For these firms, the motivation is simple: lower costs, fewer delays, and reduced exposure to geopolitical shocks. Over time, more than 20 countries have begun adopting or building systems where dollars are no longer mandatory for cross-border trade. They might still hold dollars. They might still use them sometimes. But structurally, they're designing a world where the dollar is a choice, not a requirement. Technology makes this easier than ever. Traditional cross-border banking relies on old messaging standards, manual checks, and multiple layers of intermediaries. New platforms can embed identity verification, compliance checks, and settlement logic directly into the code, allowing near-instant, secure transfers in multiple currencies. Central banks have realized that digital money doesn't just replace paper notes or bank balances. Programmable currency can enforce conditions automatically, limiting how funds are used, tracking flows in real time, and coordinating policies across borders with unprecedented precision. Whoever sets the rules for these systems gains enormous leverage. For decades, the U.S. benefited from being at the center of global finance. Now, other regions are building their own centers. Consider BRICS again. Together, they represent a huge share of global population and a significant fraction of output. Their stated goal isn't to destroy the dollar, but to avoid being overly dependent on it. For them, diversification is risk management. Saudi Arabia's evolving position illustrates how symbolic this shift has become. For years, its decision to price oil in dollars underpinned the petrodollar system and reinforced the dollar's central role. Recently, it has signaled openness to non-dollar pricing and participation in alternative payment structures. If the major oil exporter that once helped cement dollar supremacy is now exploring options, it's a sign that the old certainties are fading. Now bring this down to a personal level. Imagine you're saving for a trip abroad. In the old system, you assume that carrying dollars, physically or digitally, gives you strong buying power almost anywhere. In the emerging system, local businesses may prefer direct settlement in their own currencies or in regional digital units that clear instantly with minimal fees. Your dollars will still be accepted in many places, but they may no longer be the automatic first choice. Behind the scenes, exchange and settlement may be routed in ways that don't give the dollar any special privileges. Meanwhile, trade flows are already adjusting. Russia now sells large volumes of energy to China and India using non-dollar arrangements. The payments are made in yuan, rupees, or other currencies, then recycled into purchases of goods and services from those same countries. These loops can function reliably without bringing dollars into the picture. New development institutions like the New Development Bank or the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank finance projects in local or regional currencies. They've already approved tens or hundreds of billions of dollars worth of loans for infrastructure, power grids, transportation, communications, without anchoring everything in U.S. currency. Central banks across emerging markets have increased their purchases of gold, treating it as a neutral reserve asset that doesn't depend on another country's monetary policy. They still hold dollars, but alongside more diversified portfolios. Large corporates are making similar calculations. German industrial firms with deep ties to China and other Asian markets increasingly settle long-term contracts in euros and renminbi. By eliminating unnecessary currency conversions, they reduce costs and simplify planning. The logic is straightforward. Use the currencies most directly connected to the underlying trade. Shipping giants accept payment in a growing range of currencies and link directly to regional settlement systems. The container ship delivering products to your local retailer may be financed, insured, and paid for through a web of non-dollar transactions, all reconciled automatically by digital platforms. Universities, research institutions, and NGOs structure international programs so that money flows through local or regional systems rather than always routing through U.S. banks. For a student receiving funding from Europe or Asia, tuition, housing, and stipends might be dispersed entirely outside dollar channels. Corporate treasurers now think in terms of multi-currency cash management. Instead of assuming all roads lead to dollars, they maintain regional pools of liquidity and hedge their exposures accordingly. Some build separate infrastructures for operations in BRICS and other emerging markets, so they can continue functioning even if access to dollar clearing becomes more constrained. While these financial and corporate structures evolve, physical infrastructure is being quietly redesigned to support them. New undersea cables tie together data centers and trading hubs in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, along routes that don't necessarily connect back to traditional Western epicenters. The data traveling through those cables includes not just video calls and emails, but also payment instructions, market data, and transaction confirmations. Singapore is positioning itself as a leading multi-currency clearing hub, with new facilities built to handle high volumes of international transactions across different systems. The goal is to become a neutral switching point for money flows, not just in dollars, but in any major currency or digital unit. Hong Kong's data centers host infrastructure for cross-border payment systems that link banks and central banks across Asia. These platforms can operate continuously, settling payments in real time across multiple currencies, including digital ones, without defaulting to the dollar. The Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank's new settlement setups process financing flows for large projects in ways that bypass traditional Western-controlled channels. The physical assets built with this money, ports, roads, energy installations, anchor trade routes that can function independently of the old financial arteries. Strategic oil storage sites in the Gulf are being equipped to handle pricing and settlement in multiple currencies. Ports and logistics hubs integrate directly with regional payment platforms so that once a shipment is delivered, payments can be released automatically in whatever currency the buyer and seller agreed upon. Insurance markets are adapting too. Firms in Asia can now buy coverage that protects them against swings in the dollar, reflecting the reality that their business models depend on a complex mix of currencies rather than a single anchor. Estimates suggest that hundreds of billions of dollars are being invested in this new architecture. That spending isn't on glossy marketing or political campaigns. It's on cables, servers, clearing systems, CBDC pilots, and regional financial institutions. In other words, on the pipes and switches of a parallel financial world. What makes this movement so powerful is that it's driven by practical incentives. As trade among emerging economies grows, they need systems tailored to their needs, not just to the preferences of one dominant issuer. If the existing system doesn't offer that flexibility, they build another. All of this is changing how experts talk about the future of the dollar. For years, mainstream discussion framed the idea of a post-dollar world as alarmist. Today, even cautious institutions acknowledge that the global monetary system is becoming more multipolar. The question has shifted from, will something replace the dollar, to how diversified will the system become, and how do we manage that transition? Central banks train their staff to handle multi-currency regimes, digital settlement platforms, and reserve diversification. They run simulations that assume alternatives to the dollar are fully functional and widely used. Crisis exercises ask how to coordinate if a shock hits one currency or payment system while others remain stable. Recent trade deals routinely include clauses that allow or encourage settlement in local currencies. Regional blocs maintain currency swap lines and emergency liquidity arrangements that can be activated without involving the Federal Reserve or other Western central banks. Perhaps the clearest sign is the tone of official statements. Rather than promising to maintain a single dominant reserve currency forever, policymakers speak in terms of resilience, redundancy, and cooperation among multiple systems. By the time alternative networks can process trillions of dollars worth of transactions and entire supply chains run smoothly outside the old dollar channels, the cost of returning to a strictly dollar-centric order becomes prohibitively high for many participants. The new system acquires its own inertia. So, what does this mean for everyday life? Fast forward a few years. You open your banking app to send money abroad. Instead of one clunky, expensive international wire option, you see several streamlined choices: direct local currency settlement, regional digital currencies, even cross-border instant payment links. Your bank's interface hides the complexity, but behind the scenes, dollars may play little or no role in the path your money takes. Businesses adjust too. A small exporter in one country can sell to buyers in another, get paid in a familiar currency, and have the platform handle all conversions and routing optimally. If using dollars is more expensive or politically sensitive, the system simply picks a different route. For Americans, this world has trade-offs. On one hand, we lose some of the quiet benefits that came from everyone needing our currency. Lower borrowing costs for the government, strong built-in demand for our financial assets, and a unique degree of influence over the global system. On the other hand, we gain access to more efficient international payment networks, new investment opportunities in diversified currencies, and a global architecture that doesn't rely so heavily on any single country's decisions. The key point is that this transformation is already in motion. Every new CBDC pilot, every non-dollar trade deal, every undersea cable linking non-Western hubs, and every regional clearinghouse built to support multiple currencies pushes the world a bit further into a multipolar monetary reality. The dollar isn't going to vanish. It will remain a major currency for a long time. But its role is changing, from unquestioned center of gravity to one important node among many. Most people aren't watching this shift. They're busy with work, family, and local issues. But in the background, the financial map is being redrawn. The more we understand what's happening, the better we can protect our savings, choose where to invest, and plan for a future where global money doesn't automatically mean US dollars. Recognizing these changes isn't about panic or doom scrolling. It's about awareness. When you understand that central banks, governments, and corporations have already started to operate as if a multi-currency world is inevitable, you can make more informed choices. Instead of reacting emotionally to every headline about the dollar or every social media prediction of collapse, you can step back and look at the underlying trend lines, how trade is being invoiced, how reserves are being diversified, where new payment systems are being built. That kind of clear-eyed view helps you ask practical questions. How exposed are my savings and investments to a single currency? Do I understand the basic tools for diversification that are available to ordinary people, not just professionals? Am I paying attention to how my bank, my employer, or my government is responding to these shifts? Awareness turns a scary abstract story about the end of dollar dominance into a concrete checklist of things you can monitor and, when necessary, adjust. It allows you to distinguish between noise and signal, to see which developments are real structural changes and which are just short-term market drama. The goal isn't to become an expert overnight, but to develop enough understanding that you're not blindsided by changes that policymakers and large institutions have been preparing for years in advance. The post-dollar transition isn't coming someday in a single dramatic moment. It's unfolding step by step, trade by trade, payment by payment. And while most people are looking elsewhere, the rules of the game are quietly being rewritten. A shipping contract here gets switched from dollars to local currencies. A regional development bank there approves a project in non-dollar financing. A central bank updates its reserve policy to include more gold or alternative currencies. None of these decisions, taken alone, feel like a revolution, but together they add up to a new operating system for global money. Think of it like software updates running in the background while you go about your day. One morning, you wake up and notice that the interface has changed, and by then, the transition has already happened. The same is true for the financial system. By the time ordinary people realize how different things have become, most of the key choices will have been made. Understanding that this is a gradual, cumulative process helps you focus on trends rather than isolated events. Instead of waiting for a single breaking news alert announcing the end of dollar dominance, you can track how often you see headlines about non-dollar trade deals, central bank digital currencies, and new payment networks. Each of those stories is one more line of code in the new rulebook that will shape how your money works in the years ahead.